We live in a world where our phones are constantly buzzing, constantly demanding our attention, constantly pulling us in a million different directions at once. Notifications pile up faster than we can respond to them. Messages go unanswered for days because we tell ourselves we will get to them later, when we have more time, more energy, more mental space to engage properly. Calls get sent to voicemail because we are in meetings or driving or simply not in the mood to talk right at that exact moment. We have become so accustomed to the constant connectivity that we have paradoxically become more disconnected, more likely to ignore the very technology that is supposed to keep us close to the people we care about. Most of the time, this does not matter. Most missed calls are not urgent. Most unanswered messages can wait another day or another week without any real consequences. The person on the other end understands that we are busy, that life gets hectic, that we will catch up eventually when the timing is better for both of us. We operate under the comfortable assumption that there will always be another opportunity, another moment, another chance to connect with the people in our lives. We tell ourselves that the relationship is solid enough to withstand a little neglect, that true connections do not require constant maintenance, that the people who really matter will still be there whenever we finally get around to calling them back. But sometimes, just sometimes, a missed call is not just another notification to be dealt with later. Sometimes it carries weight that we cannot see through a phone screen, urgency that is not conveyed by a simple name and number lighting up our display. Sometimes the person on the other end has something to say that cannot wait, something that needed to be shared in that specific moment, something that will never get another chance to be expressed if that particular call goes unanswered. And we have no way of knowing which calls are the ordinary ones and which ones are the life-changing ones until it is too late to make a different choice. This is the story of James, a man whose entire world collapsed when he finally understood what one missed call had really meant. When he discovered what message had been trying to reach him on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 month before his life was permanently altered by grief and regret that would haunt him for the rest of his days. James was a successful marketing executive in his mid-30s, the kind of person who prided himself on his efficiency and his ability to juggle multiple responsibilities without dropping any balls. His calendar was color-coded and meticulously planned. His inbox was organized into folders and subfolders. His life ran on schedules and routines that maximized productivity and minimized wasted time. He was good at his job, respected by his colleagues, moving steadily up the corporate ladder toward the kind of success he had always imagined for himself. But that success came at a cost that James did not fully recognize until it was too late to do anything about it. His phone was always on Do Not Disturb during work hours because he had learned that constant interruptions destroyed his focus and made it impossible to get anything meaningful accomplished. He would glance at missed notifications during breaks, scrolling quickly through to see if anything required immediate attention. But most things got mentally filed away as something to deal with later, when he had finished the task at hand. His parents had learned to text rather than call because James rarely answered his phone anymore, always too busy with meetings or projects or the endless demands of his professional life. His friends joked that you had to schedule time with James weeks in advance, and even then, he might cancel at the last minute if something came up at work. His older brother Daniel was one of the people James kept meaning to call back, but never quite got around to. They had been close as kids, inseparable really. But as adults, their lives had diverged in ways that created distance neither of them knew how to bridge. Daniel had stayed in their hometown, working as a high school teacher, married with 2 young kids, living the kind of quiet suburban life that James had run away from as soon as he graduated college. James had moved to the city, chasing ambition and opportunity, building a life that looked nothing like the one he had grown up in. They still loved each other, still considered themselves close in the way that siblings who share history always are. But they did not talk as often as they should have, did not make the effort to really stay connected beyond occasional text messages and obligatory holiday phone calls. On a Tuesday afternoon in late September, James was in back-to-back meetings, the kind of day where he barely had time to eat lunch, let alone check his personal phone. Somewhere around 2 in the afternoon, his phone buzzed in his pocket with an incoming call. He glanced down quickly and saw Daniel's name on the screen. His first thought was that it was probably about their mom's upcoming birthday. Maybe Daniel wanting to coordinate on a gift or plan a surprise. James made a mental note to call him back after work, then turned his attention back to the presentation happening in front of him, completely unaware that his brother was sitting in a hospital room staring at his phone, desperately hoping James would answer, because what he needed to say could not be reduced to a voicemail or a text message. Daniel did not call back. He did not leave a message. He sat there for a long time, just holding his phone, trying to find the courage to try again, or the words to explain in a message what the doctors had just told him, but nothing felt adequate. How do you leave a voicemail telling your little brother that the headaches and fatigue you had been dismissing for months turned out to be stage 4 cancer that had already spread too far to treat aggressively? How do you text someone that the doctors are talking about palliative care and making you comfortable rather than fighting to cure you? How do you explain that you are 38 years old with a wife and 2 small children, and you have maybe 3 to 6 months left if you are lucky? So Daniel put his phone down and told himself he would try again later. Maybe when James was done with work. Maybe when he could have a proper conversation, without the pressure of back-to-back meetings. He wanted to hear his brother's voice, needed to tell him in person, or at least over the phone. Needed to have that connection before he had to start telling everyone else, and dealing with their reactions, and their pity, and their devastating questions about treatment options, and second opinions. But the right moment to make that call never quite materialized, and as the days passed, it became harder and harder to pick up the phone. Because now there was guilt layered on top of everything else. Guilt about not reaching out sooner, about keeping this secret, about letting time slip away. James did what he always did with missed calls from family that did not seem urgent. He meant to call back that evening, but got caught up in finishing a report that was due the next morning. He thought about it the next day, but got distracted by a crisis at work that required his full attention. By the end of the week, the missed call had been buried under dozens of other notifications, and James had convinced himself that if it was important, Daniel would have called again or sent a message. This was how their relationship had functioned for years. Sporadic contact, separated by long stretches of mutual busyness. So there was nothing unusual about letting a week pass without returning a call. 3 weeks after that missed call, James got a different phone call, this one from his mother. And the moment he heard her voice, he knew something was terribly wrong. She was crying, could barely get the words out, and when she finally told him that Daniel was in the hospital and things were very bad and he needed to come home right away, James felt the floor drop out from underneath him. He left work immediately, threw some clothes in a bag, drove 4 hours through the night to get to the hospital where his brother was lying in a bed that seemed too small for his 6-foot frame. His skin gray and his eyes sunken, and his whole body diminished by the cancer that was eating him alive from the inside. Daniel smiled weakly when James walked into the room, reached out a hand that shook with effort. James took it, sat down in the chair beside the bed, and started apologizing through tears for not being there sooner, for not knowing, for not understanding. And Daniel squeezed his hand and said in a voice barely above a whisper that he had tried to tell him, that he had called a month ago wanting to explain before everyone else knew, wanting to have a real conversation before the cancer made that impossible. He said he had picked up the phone that day in the doctor's office, right after getting the diagnosis, because James was the first person he wanted to talk to. The person whose voice he needed to hear. The brother he wanted to lean on through the impossible journey he was facing. This was the moment when everything shattered for James. When the full weight of that one missed call came crashing down on him with a force that knocked the air from his lungs and left him gasping with a grief so profound it felt like drowning. James stared at his brother, his mind racing back to that Tuesday afternoon, to that split-second decision to ignore the call and return to his meeting, to the casual assumption that whatever Daniel needed could wait because work felt more urgent in that moment. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and scrolled back through his call history until he found it. That missed call from exactly 4 weeks ago, a notification he had swiped away without a second thought. He stared at it now like it was evidence of a crime he had committed against the person he loved most in the world. Proof that he had failed at something fundamental and irreversible. Daniel tried to tell him it was okay, that he understood James was busy, that it was not his fault. All the things that kind people say when someone is drowning in guilt. But James could barely hear him through the roaring in his own head, through the endless loop of what if playing over and over. What if he had answered that call? What if he had heard the fear in Daniel's voice and dropped everything to be there for him? What if they had had those extra 4 weeks of real connection, instead of Daniel carrying this alone, while James went about his normal life completely oblivious to the nightmare his brother was living through? The doctors had given Daniel weeks at best. The cancer had progressed rapidly, more aggressively than anyone had anticipated. By the time James got the call from his mother, Daniel had already lost the ability to do most things for himself. He could not walk without assistance. He could barely eat. The pain medication made him foggy and distant. The man lying in that hospital bed barely resembled the vibrant, energetic brother James had grown up with. The one who had taught him to ride a bike and stood up for him against bullies, and been his best friend for the first 20 years of his life, before distance and different choices had created a gap they kept meaning to bridge, but never quite did. James spent every possible moment at the hospital over those final 2 weeks. He held Daniel's hand and told him stories about their childhood. He showed him pictures on his phone and made promises about taking care of Daniel's wife and kids. He said all the things he should have been saying for years, but had been too busy, or too distant, or too caught up in his own life to prioritize. He apologized over and over for the missed call, for not being there when Daniel first got the news, for all the other calls and messages and invitations he had let slip by, because something else had seemed more important in the moment. And Daniel, even in his fog of pain and medication, tried to absolve him. He said that life gets busy, and people do not always answer their phones, and it was okay. Really, it was okay. But James could see the truth in his brother's eyes, could see that those 4 weeks of silence had hurt in ways that went beyond the physical pain of the cancer. Daniel had wanted his brother, had needed that connection, had reached out in his moment of greatest fear and vulnerability, only to be met with an unanswered call and weeks of silence that must have felt like abandonment, even though that was not what James had intended at all. When Daniel died on a Thursday morning, with his family gathered around his bed, James was holding his hand, but all he could think about was that Tuesday afternoon, a month and a half earlier, when his brother had needed him, and he had been too busy to answer. That missed call became the defining regret of James's life. The thing he would replay in his mind at 3 in the morning, when sleep would not come. The moment he would give anything to go back and change, if such things were possible. In the weeks and months after Daniel's death, James became obsessed with that call in a way that was probably unhealthy, but felt necessary. He listened to his voicemail history, hoping to find some message he had missed, some clue he had overlooked, but there was nothing. Daniel had not left a voicemail because some things are too big and too terrible to explain through a recording. He had needed a voice, a connection, a moment of real contact with the person who had always been his closest ally. And James had been in a meeting that probably did not matter, discussing marketing strategies that would be irrelevant a year later, completely unaware that his brother was trying to tell him the most important thing he would ever need to know. James started answering every single call after that, no matter who it was from or what he was doing when the phone rang. His colleagues noticed the change, the way he would excuse himself from meetings to take calls from his mother or old friends or people he had not talked to in years. His productivity at work suffered because he could not focus the way he used to, could not treat his phone as just another tool to be managed efficiently. Every incoming call carried the weight of possibility now, the fear that ignoring it might mean missing something crucial, something irreversible, something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He called his parents multiple times a week now, long conversations about nothing important, but everything important all at the same time. He reached out to old friends he had lost touch with, rekindling relationships he had let fade through years of being too busy to maintain them. He made time for his niece and nephew, Daniel's children who would grow up without their father, and he tried to be present for them in ways he wished he had been more present for their dad. He could not go back and answer that one call, could not recover those lost weeks, could not tell Daniel all the things he should have said while there was still time. But he could answer the next call, and the one after that, and all the others that would come from people who might need to hear his voice for reasons he would never know, unless he picked up the phone. This is where the story reaches its painful conclusion, not with healing or redemption, but with the hard truth that some mistakes cannot be fixed, and some moments cannot be recovered, and we have to live with the weight of our choices, even when those choices were made in ignorance rather than malice. James learned the devastating lesson that missed calls are not always just missed calls. Sometimes they are missed opportunities to connect with someone who needed you. Sometimes they are missed chances to hear something important before it is too late. Sometimes they are missed moments that can never be recreated or recovered, no matter how much you wish you could go back and make a different choice. He learned that being busy is not actually a good enough reason to ignore the people you love, that work and meetings and all the things that seem urgent in the moment are rarely as important as we convince ourselves they are, that the truly irreplaceable things in life are not career achievements or professional success, but the relationships and connections that give our lives meaning. The missed call from a month ago was meant to tell James that there was not much time left, that his brother was facing the end of his life and wanted to share that burden with the person he trusted most, that Daniel needed his little brother in a way he had not needed him since they were kids, navigating the complexities of growing up together. But James did not answer, and Daniel did not call back, and 4 weeks passed where they could have been supporting each other through the nightmare, but instead Daniel faced it largely alone, while James remained blissfully unaware until it was almost too late to say goodbye. The story of James and Daniel is not unique. It is happening all around us all the time. These small moments of disconnect that sometimes turn out to be massive moments of consequence. Someone tries to reach out and does not get through, and decides not to try again. Someone has something important to say, but the timing is never quite right. Someone needs connection but gets voicemail instead, and interprets the silence as indifference, even when it is really just bad timing. We are all walking around with phones full of people we mean to call back, messages we plan to respond to later, relationships we think we have unlimited time to nurture and maintain. But time is not unlimited. Later is not guaranteed. A call you think you will return tomorrow might be the one you will spend the rest of your life wishing you had answered today. The person whose message you are putting off might be dealing with something they have not told you about. might need to hear your voice more than you could possibly understand, might be trying to say something that cannot wait, even though they do not have the words to explain the urgency through a text or a voicemail. James would give anything to go back to that Tuesday afternoon and make a different choice, to step out of that meeting and answer his phone, to hear his brother's voice and understand immediately that something was terribly wrong, to be there from the beginning of Daniel's nightmare, instead of showing up near the end when there was barely any time left. But he cannot go back. None of us can. We can only move forward with the knowledge that every missed call is a gamble. Every ignored message is a risk. Every decision to prioritize work or convenience or personal preference over human connection might turn out to be a choice we regret for the rest of our lives. So answer your phone, return those calls, respond to those messages, make time for the people in your life before time runs out and all you have left is regret and a call history full of missed opportunities. Do not wait until you have more time or energy or mental space, because that perfect moment might never come. Do not assume that people will understand or that there will be another chance, because understanding does not erase hurt, and another chance is not guaranteed. Do not let busy become the reason you lose your opportunity to connect with someone who needs you, or to hear something that someone needs to tell you. Because somewhere in your phone right now might be someone who is trying to gather the courage to reach out. Someone who is dealing with something they have not told you about. Someone who needs to hear your voice more urgently than you could possibly know. And if you do not answer, if you let that call go to voicemail with plans to return it later, you might discover one day that later never came, that the moment passed, that what they needed to tell you never got said because the opportunity closed and could not be reopened. Do not let the next missed call be the one that haunts you for the rest of your life. Do not let a month from now be when you finally understand what today's ignored call really meant. Do not carry the weight that James carries now, the knowledge that he was not there when his brother needed him most, because he was too busy with things that did not matter nearly as much as he thought they did in that moment. Learn from his story. Answer the call. Make the time. Be present for the people who are trying to reach you before it is too late, and all you have left is a missed call notification and a lifetime of wishing you had made a different choice.